So thank you very much for spending the next hour with us talking about the opportunities for startups in the changing world of energy infrastructure. And we have fantastic speakers today with us. Matthew Sherburne, he's a venture principal at Shell Ventures. John Greasley, he is the chair of Great Britain Interconnectors Forum. John has over 30 years experience in the energy industry and most recently worked in the interconnector team at National Grid, leading on all regulatory issues associated with existing and potential interconnectors. John also chairs the Great Britain Interconnectors Forum, a body that brings together all existing and potential interconnectors in Great Britain to discuss issues of mutual interest. Sergey Donskoy. Sergey? You're here. Okay. Sergey Donskoy, he's head of portfolio growth at First Imagine Ventures. Sergey has more than 20 years in equity research at Societe Generale and other leading financial institutions. In First Imagine, Sergey assists portfolio companies in developing and executing of sustainable value growth strategies. I am the moderator. My name is Nastasya Savina, and I'd like to thank amazing Tara, Winston, and Koji, he's not here, from the Energy and Environment Club of the London Business School for supporting this climate tech project. And our research partner is Net Zero Insights. Key global researchers such as IPCC, International Energy Agency, and a few others, they say that energy infrastructure market will change. Obviously, it will change to accommodate the requirements of net zero by 2050. And these energy infrastructure should be able to serve, deliver, manage power from low carbon sources like nuclear and renewables. And let me quote the recent report of IPCC. It's a United Nations think tank for assessing science related to climate change. They say an increasing reliance on electricity from variable renewable sources, notably wind and solar power, disrupts old concepts and makes many existing guidelines obsolete for power system planning. And first of all, I think it's important to understand what are the key challenges that the current energy infrastructure faces. And I'd like to ask this question to you, John.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Yeah, I think we're really in the middle of the energy transition, you know, as we're transitioning from the old world to hopefully to the net zero world. And our government has put a lot of faith in wind. It's got a very ambitious target of 50 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2030. But we're making good progress towards that. And earlier, I think last week, National Grid announced that wind was the highest generator for the first quarter of the year. We generated more electricity from wind than we did from gas for the first time. And when the wind's blowing across GB, we can generate about 20,000 megawatts of wind. And that's great, absolutely wonderful. But there are times when the wind doesn't blow. And there have been times this winter where that 20,000 megawatts has been about 400 megawatts. You know, there's a massive gap for the grid to fill. And how does the grid manage that volatility, I think, is one of the big challenges. How does it balance the system? And how do we avoid using or building fossil fuel power stations when that's really the last thing we want to be doing now? Well, there are various things that we can do. We could store it when there's an excess of power, and we could use it when power is in deficit. And I think we'll see batteries becoming increasingly common on the grid, and I think we'll see that technology improve, both in terms of efficiency and the size of the batteries to make it more of a part of the electricity system. We can also store electricity by converting it, perhaps to hydrogen. And again, I think we'll expect to see that technology develop over the years and become more efficient. But when there's lots of wind around, and we've got 50 gigawatts of wind generated in the North Sea has been described as the Saudi Arabia of wind. We could export it. We could export it to our neighbours, and to export it, we need electricity interconnectors. And interconnectors are subsea cables that connect us to our neighbours. we've currently got, I'm sorry, I'm just throwing out a load of numbers, but we've currently got 8,400 megawatts of interconnected capacity. The government's ambition is to get to 18,000 megawatts of capacity by 2030. And there are various projects, that are underway at various stages to do that. We've got projects like, there's a project called Aquind, which is going to be a 2,000 megawatt interconnected to France, further interconnected to France. And there's another project which is like an evolution. There's a project called Lion Link, and this project actually incorporates offshore wind as well. So it will be an interconnector to the Netherlands, but we'll have wind connected to the cable as well. So the great thing about interconnectors is they flow both ways. So as we can export any surplus power we've got, we can import power when we need it, perhaps to replace some of that 20,000 megawatts when the wind stops blowing, for instance. So I think in summary, a good energy system has got a diverse mix of generation in it, and interconnectors allow us to increase that diversity by giving us access to other markets. So it might be low carbon nuclear from France, it might be hydropower from Norway, or it might be wind power from Denmark, which increases the diversity of our system and will help manage the volatility as we move forward.
Thank you. There is one parameter which is particularly important and is also in the center of all discussions about the future of energy infrastructure, is that when we have basically with nuclear and with renewables, we can't control the generation practically, because in nuclear you can't switch off the generator, and in renewables you don't control when the wind blows or when the sun shines, but at the same time the demand is also uncontrollable but predictable, but it's very variable, and there are so many peaks, even hourly, daily, weekly, seasonal, etc. So the storage that you mentioned, the possibility to generate with these low carbon means excess energy and then store it or transmit it. We need to understand the costs of this, the cost of transmitted energy, this cost of stored energy, because as far as I understand, there's a huge loss when you, for example, for green hydrogen, right? How much is lost?
I think it's about 30%.
On every conversion. So from electricity to hydrogen, 30%, from hydrogen to electricity, again, another 30%. So it means that the resulting energy, from the stored one is super expensive, right? It's at least twice more expensive, if not more. And in terms of transition, for example, transiting this power that could be excess power generated by low carbon sources to the places where the demand is high, how high is the loss?
On transmission lines, well, interconnectors are typically direct current, and so they'll lose probably up to maximum of about 5% over 500 kilometers, something like that. Okay.
It makes it much more sensible cost for the energy and much less cost. Okay.
I think what I said, the demand side clearly has got a part to play in this. I think energy and any energy efficiency measures have to be welcomed, and some of the pictures this morning talked about that. I think it's great, but the best type of reduction is not using it in the first place. I think we've seen this winter the demand flexibility service, where a lot of us turn off our appliances at 5:30 on Tuesday afternoons, to try and bring the peak down. I think when we think about startups and sort of data services, then I think there's certainly a role for smart communications with smart devices in our homes, so that instead of just chucking the dishwasher on when we want to put it on, or the washing machine, they're controlled and they work at the times when it's good for the grid to work. Millions and millions of appliances across the country can make a big difference, and I think we'll see more and more of that as we move forward.
So what you're saying is that in the future grid future energy infrastructure, the end user should be much more efficient.
Yeah, I think up until
I don't think that's exactly right. I think it's today, right? There are startups out there today that are doing this where they're orchestrating time of use charging across fleets of EV chargers, that are, B2C EVs, right? So it's not, that BT's EVs are being charged in sort of a wave. It's that a neighborhood's EVs are being charged in a wave, such that you basically lower it and you sort of flatten out the duck curve, right? So if you can do that, then you basically avoid a lot of CAPEX that you need to put in from an interconnect perspective, and you sort of levelize that cost that you need throughout the day. Again, sort of what you're saying, where we can, on a long enough time horizon, it's relatively easy for us to predict what electricity usage is needed. It's very difficult to predict the more granular that gets, right? Because I'm using this microphone today, I wasn't using it yesterday, right? It needs to get charged. And sort of understanding that is harder, but the more aggregated you get there, the easier it becomes.
Does it mean that the habits or of the energy users, the future habits will change as well, so that they would need to adapt to sort of more variable pricing for the energy, or not? Or you think that the balancing ability of the grid would be good enough to maintain a relatively stable prices?
Personal opinion is that the teams that are going to win here are the ones that allow us to not really change our consumption habits, but they manage that need anyways, right? So the same way that when you plug in your phone right now, Apple levelizes that charging across the entire night to make sure that it's ready when you need it in the morning. It doesn't just charge it immediately, but I didn't change my behavior. I still just plug it in when I go to bed at night, and it sort of automatically does that for me, right? That's more of a winning consumer operation there. Now, from a B2B perspective, yeah, because of the sort of high sensitivity towards costs there, I think you can implement a bit more behavioral change there, but it's sort of, there's kind of two buckets there.
Do you have anything to add here?
Well, I would say that what will change in our behavior and the way we use power infrastructure and consume, I think users will become more independent. I mean, we will have more and more solar power installed on our rooftops. We will have more and more batteries installed at homes. We will have boilers replaced with heat pumps, and these heat pumps will be ultimately given control over those heat pumps to grid operators or whatever form. And this is something that is very new to most of us. I don't know how many of people sitting in this audience have solar on their rooftops. I think that our children will live in a completely different world. Well, this will be not must maybe, but it will come as something very natural to them. That's one thing. And otherwise, yes, I think that the one thing that was mentioned is that the old way of thinking about demand was something very steady, very inertial, and producers were tailoring supply to some very, very steady, inflexible patterns. This is changing. This is changing with time of use tariffs. This is changing with incentives, and of course, storage is a very big kind of a game changer, if you like, because of the three parts, or at least that we can isolate in grid or energy infrastructure more generally: transmission, distribution, balancing, and storage. Until now, the first two, they have been very conspicuous. Storage is something that has been very conspicuous until now. Well, I think most people here know about pumped hydro storage, which is not playing really a major role in any energy system, I believe, around the world. We do have a seasonal gas storage, but again, it has been to some extent more of a kind of backup solution. This is changing as we speak, and future energy system will not be able to operate without massive storage of very different kind. And one thing that we still need to learn and understand is what place there will be for each kind of storage, how these different solutions will interact, how much of the storage will be at grid level, how much of the storage will be at consumer level, at district level. This is something that I think we're only now beginning to learn.
Does it mean, so kind of your first idea is that there should be a lot of local kind of the grid functions should be localized, like on the local level, district level, like to say, like generation, storage, managing, balancing, etc. This is the first idea. And the second is that the second is question. You say that storage would be part of the future energy infrastructure, obviously, but the storage is expensive. It makes this energy expensive. How?
It does, but then again, what price do you pay, or do you put on energy security, right?
Okay.
One question you asked before is one thing that you mentioned is that, for instance, hydrogen efficiency is pretty low in terms of our round trip, right? Converting there and back, we lose about 30 to 40%. The point is, however, that and the same will go, by the way, to some of the long duration battery solutions like vanadium flow batteries or something like that. The point is that you will need them relatively infrequently. And the point about storage is that when we talk about storage, it's not about the same as we talk about cost of energy. We're talking about storage in the context of specific use case. This battery will kick in maybe once a month, maybe once a quarter.
For life-saving operation.
Of course,
Yeah, okay.
matter in the sense, exactly, how much energy you lose on this round trip as long as it kicks in at the right moment. So that's one thing to mention. The other thing is that batteries are getting cheaper. Well, again, speaking of this country, it's not maybe something that is quite true now, but if we look at a country like Germany, which is, I think, ahead in Europe in terms of solar adoption, I think like 90% of all solar installations are accompanied with batteries. It's just, it goes without saying, if you have sufficient solar capacity on your rooftop, to avoid curtailing, to utilize this power to full potential, you need storage. And it's like, we invest in houses, right? We take 20, 30-year mortgages, and we think that's all right. Okay, well, this is part of a house now, right? And compared to the price of the house, which is 300, 400, 900, whatever.
It's not about London you're talking, right?
Well, I'm talking about generally around the country, right? Yeah. Here this will be even more the case. The cost of the storage is minuscule, but it gives you much more security, and it's a completely different way of thinking, which is it is new to us now, but again, I believe it will completely change over 1 or 2 generations.
Okay, understood. So once we sort of describe these questions and challenges of the future energy infrastructure, what do you think are the hottest segments where the startups would play? Because usually the industry is dominated by huge companies like Centrica, National Grid, Shell, etc. or interconnectors. Any of the interconnectors is a company with a CAPEX of $1 billion or $2 billion. Yeah? It's not a typical startup model, but in this changing landscape, I'm quite sure that some opportunities will emerge where the little guys could play. So what are those niches? Where could and should startuppers focus their attention? And if startups focus their attention there, then investors should too, right? So what do you think? What are the hot segments? Tell me, name me top 3.
Just going? Yeah. Okay. From what has been said already, storage is one. And I think here we're talking about all multitude of solutions. It can be battery storage, it can be flywheels or hydrogen. The important point here is that, yes, the way how infrastructure is built it is not going to change, right? It will always be a job for large companies that have access to long-term financing, and it will require enormous amount of engineering, research, approvals. But what startups do, they give us and give the market new ways to use this infrastructure. They provide new solutions. And this can change the way how the infrastructure is built profoundly. So storage is one thing. Then speaking of what startups exist, there are startups that provide new technology. There are startups that provide a new way of doing business, conducting business, provide new solutions in this way. And there are startups, and there will be startups that will help market harness demand response, something that has also been mentioned.
Novel here, yeah.
Well, this and all that is related to aggregation, to virtual power plants, energy communities that are much talked about but hardly exist. They will, they will come into being, not everywhere, but there will be use cases where this will be the solution or one of the solutions. So this is more on the software side, if you like, than on hardware side, in a sense that here we're talking more about taking maybe some off-the-shelf hardware solutions, but combining them with novel business techniques, business models, and providing services.
Okay. Do you have an opinion?
Yeah, I think I agree with that. I think certainly there's a space for that sort of aggregation at domestic consumer level. I think we saw a great example of one of the pictures from the Neuville. I think the example we saw this morning was on generation, but I'm thinking more of like grid monitoring, performance. The grid's going to be much more dynamic from the transmission level all the way through to the distribution level. And there must be opportunities for data collection and monitoring and analysis to assess how the assets are operating, to protect the assets, to predict when maintenance is required, and condition monitoring like that to provide value from working alongside one of those big companies like you mentioned before.
Okay, Matt, what do you think? What are these top 3 hot niches where all of us should look at?
Yeah, so I'm gonna have to agree. Energy storage has got to be sort of top of the list. I mean, if you come up with a better battery, you're a billionaire tomorrow, right? Like that's just sort of the bottom line, right? But that being said, I think that the last 2 months have been sort of the onslaught of AI, right? I would really start to think about how you can start to use that sort of stuff to really predict what the energy markets are going to be doing in 2 minutes, in 5 minutes, in 10 minutes, in 15 minutes, in a day, in 2 days, right? How can you do that day ahead prediction that is just really helpful for the utilities to then avoid CAPEX, right? I think largely what you're hearing about both of these guys talking about is any idea that helps these large companies to avoid having to spend CAPEX to really build out either the T&D aspect or the generation aspect is something that you're going to get paid for at the end of the day. And it's something that can happen today to help us be prepared for the energy transition tomorrow, right? All of that stuff is really helpful. And then I guess if I can put a little plug in for the thing that I would like to see, because one thing I really worry about is that, while I believe very much in the energy agenda and we can all put solar panels on our houses and put batteries in our garages, if you live in a flat, you can't do any of that, right? Your landlord has to do something, your building manager has to do something, you have to do something, your neighbors have to do something. It's not that there's like a technology problem there. There are other problems that need to get solved. And so there are business model issues there. I would actually look to this crowd and say there are business model problems there. There are stakeholder model problems there that need to be solved. And that would be a really interesting and a very large market across basically any major city you can see.
Yeah, and maybe to add one thing to this. Exactly, you can provide a hardware solution, or you can offer a new business model. And in a way, the larger type of startups, companies, then maybe less talked about. But if you like, if this or that business model is proven to be viable, these companies are more likely to become unicorns than somebody who has invented a kind of a novel way of doing something in terms of hardware, because this business is imminently scalable, right? And if you can scale it quickly and if it provides services, then this is the way to grow a very, very large business. With hardware, it's a much more complicated conversation. It is possible as well, but it's much more, I would say, case-to-case specific.
Okay, thank you. Let me wrap up so that what I understood, and please remind me if I forgot anything. So anything around storing or cheaper storage of energy is going to be hot, particularly if you have any novel technology. Second is managing the grid, or basically improving the efficiency of the grid of the current infrastructure. It's closer to the demand than to the generation side, as far as I understand. I mean, the problem. But whoever does that, hopefully you already have your unicorn. Whoever does that can become a unicorn. And localized grids or local grids could be one of the hot segments as well. Yeah, when particularly for remote locations, remote areas, you know, a service company or kind of a large service company that can provide a total solution, hardware, software, management, services, everything else to localize the grid functions on the remote community, generation, storage, management, balancing, whatever. Yeah. So those three, what did I miss? Did I miss anything?
Well, there are certainly more things that we can talk about, but I think this is sort of top
Okay.
list.
And also, as a sort of advice for the startup, you mentioned, Sergey and Matt, you mentioned as well, is that when the startup thinks of starting a business here, the natural partner is the existing player. Is it true? Matt, can you elaborate on this?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think right now, if you look at sort of where the infrastructure sits, it's going to be almost impossible to play in the energy industry without working with the Centricas or someone along those lines. It's just not really possible. So you need to build into your model that you're providing a service to them, you're buying a service off of them, or you're a partner to them in some manner. So that will drive some of your decisions around go-to-market, some of your decisions around how you build culture in your company, some of your decisions around sort of sales cycles and things along those lines that you're going to be expecting. And I think you need to be very cognizant of, especially if you're going to be playing in the energy industry, which, you know, because of capital requirements, but just also the physics of it, is very regional, but it crosses boundaries, right? So what may be a regulated market in one nation is going to be an unregulated market in the next, and how do you play there? And think about the incentives that are sort of structured there, right? Just simply being the sort of the shiniest widget on the shelf may not actually be what gets you what gets you bought by one of these players, because there are some odd incentives that are at work here, and you need to understand those.
Well, you understand about crossing the boundaries much better than anyone, yeah, with interconnectors, right? Because that's the issue that interconnectors face every day.
Yeah, and I think it's worth noting that in Great Britain, Ofgem, the regulator, has got a duty to provide competition. And I mean, look back 20 years, we got the transmission company National Grid, and we got the distribution companies, 12 of them. And the distribution companies have changed hands so many times and consolidated. National Grid has taken over a big chunk of that. But as that's been going on, there have been lots of new transmission companies formed. And they started as startups, and they're big companies now. Like you say, they've got massive investment behind them. Offshore transmission owners have proliferated to connect up the wind that is already out offshore in the North Sea. The interconnectors that we talked about, National Grid is probably the biggest fish in that pond in terms of building that infrastructure. But the next round of interconnection is probably going to be non-National Grid, you know, and so yes, these are massive CapEx-driven companies, but they are non-traditional electricity industry companies as well.
Do you see a space for little startups? I mean, not in the transmission segment of the infrastructure, because obviously CAPEX is horrendous, but maybe servicing transmission companies.
Absolutely, that like the data monitoring, so the asset monitoring, data collection, protection, all of those types of activities. Absolutely.
So whatever increases the efficiency of transmission. Understood.
And if that's up to look at innovative ways of predicting when things need to be maintained, efficient operation, like you say, absolutely. Yeah.
Understood. Also, there is a kind of pretty famous saying in the climatic industry is that about 40% of all the technology that will allow us to get to net zero by 2050 is not invented yet. Do you feel that that in this segment, in the energy infrastructure industry, is it the case? Do we already have the tech? Or do we already have the technologies invented? It just takes too much. And building an interconnector takes 15 years, 10 years?
Yeah, and it's not new technology, really. I mean, the oldest interconnector that we've got is the IFA interconnector to France, which was commissioned in 1986. The interconnectors that we're building today are more or less the same technology. You can't change the laws of physics. It's HVDC technology, converter station. But I think, more generally, the government is clearly backing wind, as the primary way of meeting net zero. Wouldn't it be great if something? It feels to me as though wind's been being talked about for a long time and it's now exploding. Wouldn't it be great if there's something that we haven't thought about yet, alongside hydrogen, alongside batteries, that is really that step change in technology that will help us. We've still got 25 years, haven't we? So who knows?
Yeah.
I would mainly add to this that we probably have tools, but we don't have yet the perfect tools. It's like, we are in the Stone Age and we have got our first, sticks and the stone axes, and then after thousands of years, and now this time will be compressed, we'll have something, much more sophisticated. And this also poses a problem because in some cases, anticipation of this learning curve and improvements coming 5 years from now, 10 years from now, stymied investment because companies don't want to commit to a technology that will be obsolete in 5 years' time, in 10 years' time. And how to overcome this obstacle is, I think, one of the issues for policymakers to create an environment where this will be less. From a business point perspective, it's clear you want to wait as long as possible until you commit to something that will be then your long-term piece of equipment. But this, unfortunately, is not the ideal solution from the society point of view. And how to meet these two interests is one of the big questions to me.
Usually it's a modular structure or something. What do you think about, have we invented all the necessary tech yet?
No, because we're looking at, whether or not your net zero date is 2040 or 2050, if we have all the tech that we're going to have and we're not going to do anything new for the next 15 to 25 years, that is depressing. That is a depressing thing to say. It means that no 1 year is trying.
But beyond emotions.
I just fundamentally, I believe much more in the human spirit of ingenuity and sort of solving problems that there's no way that we can't come up with something new. Like maybe we have the tools at hand that could get us there, but we will definitely come up with something new that gets us there better, faster, cheaper, more efficiently, what have you. Something's coming.
Okay. It feels like from the conversation before is that more efficient storage might be one of the kind of in demand, because what you said, that whoever invents a better battery or cheaper battery becomes a billionaire overnight. So that, then more efficient conversion, from hydrogen or ammonia or whatever this storage medium is. So more efficient conversion might be a help. What else? I know. About the wind turbine land. It's a huge landfill. So recycling them. Whoever invents their way to recycle this.
Yes, some companies already try to, but again, I think that we are far from a perfect solution. We're just making first steps towards this.
Okay. After, imagine we have already this tech. What could and should be done to speed up commercialization? And maybe there are some other problems that we have and face to speed up implementation of these new technologies and new business models.
I mean, I'll leave the policy questions to James, but I think the advice that I give to this crowd is that I think right now, if you're going out looking for money and you want to raise money at sort of the seed level and you've got decent CV, you've got a team that can do it, you've got a decent idea, I think that money is available either via dilutive equity means or via non-dilutive grants, government funding, things along those lines. That exists. I think if you've got a product where you've got significant commercial traction and you want to raise a Series D, that money exists, right? Where we're seeing a gap in the market right now is teams that are sort of trying to graduate from sort of their seed into their A or B round, and they've just not necessarily been able to really pull the commercial traction ready yet, right? And so what they're doing is they're sort of continuing to flounder at that stage. My strong advice would be at that seed stage when you raise that money is focus very highly on commercial traction, not just on that product development. At a Series A or a Series B, well, let's call it Series A, your investors are still going to be willing to accept some technical risk, right? But they're only going to be willing to accept that technical risk if you have been able to mitigate some of that commercial risk already by being able to demonstrate LOIs with credible customers, some sort of revenue, some sort of understanding of what those margin profiles are going to be looking like. That's sort of the key to being able to kind of make that gap and to sort of to jump the gap there.
Okay, thank you very much. It's a very valuable advice. It also might affect the amount of capital the current startups are raising right now for seed, right? Because it means that probably their runway would be longer than they expect at the moment. Okay, any other factors impeding the growth of or change of the infrastructure?
Well, I think that there is one fundamental factor that hasn't been mentioned specifically yet, although it's kind of can be deduced from what I've been talking about. Some of the things that we do and we implement, even maybe at household level or company level, they have social importance. I mean, basically, well, the more, for instance, we invest in simply thermal efficiency of housing, the less we need to invest in this grid infrastructure to move about electrons in peak hours to make our houses warm and bright in wintertime or at night. And unfortunately, these benefits, they're not appreciated enough. What I mean that by doing this or that at house level, at apartment level, at company level, doing it collectively saves potentially billions and trillions of dollars for nations and for the world. But this benefit is not shared. So I mean, how to make this, how to make these benefits somehow being possible to monetize for companies that do this good for the society is, I have no idea, to be quite honest, or no answer. But this is kind of one of the fundamental issues. I think it's in economy, it's called tragedy of the commons or something like that. It's when you have something that can potentially be of very high value, but because nobody individually can pay, doesn't happen.
Okay, thank you. Understood. Thank you very much. I think it's time to ask some questions. Do you have questions? Yeah.
Thanks very much, guys. I'm curious as to how your scope has changed as investors. For example, with battery energy storage systems, it becomes more important what happens upstream and downstream on the supply side, materials, and also downstream in circularity. So as investors, has your scope changed to also start investing in startups earlier with sourcing the materials? Like, how's your approach changed?
Even in a sense of how much the risks of procuring, say, raw materials matter for companies.
Yeah, so like if with a lithium-ion battery, now we're facing constraints in terms of the emissions and also the capacity of getting that lithium or cobalt. So do you start now investing in like companies that source those materials better?
Well, yeah, well, for instance, one thing that I think, well, us and probably everyone else is starting to look at is that companies that offer solutions in terms of recycling. This is not yet a problem because we are still in the early stages of adoption of electric vehicles, of solar panels, well, in most places in Europe. But 5 years later, 10 years later, 10 years later, this will become an increasingly important problem. And by providing solutions on this front, we can mitigate these risks a great deal, and by basically building what is called circular economy. I think this is one of the basic premises that we need to have to make this low carbon world happen. Because if we keep losing same amount of raw materials in the cycle as we're doing now, this will unfortunately not get us anywhere. We need to become much more efficient in terms of recycling and reuse.
Thank you.
More questions? Yep.
Thanks for a great panel. My question is on how the US came out with the IRA and all the policy responses and those dynamics. Has that at all shifted how you're looking at the energy market, where to invest both geographically and also just segments in the market?
Yeah, short answer is yes, that has absolutely had an effect. I think the longer answer is that we certainly expect to see that the EU is going to have elements of the Fit for 55 package and the Green Deal infrastructure program, I think is what it's called, that'll map to what the IRA is doing. I would also say that the EU already does have a significant amount of that funding. It's just that the IRA makes it much, much cleaner in terms of how you actually go about doing it. The money that you get out of Brussels just tends to be a lot more complex in terms of how you get it. I would say that the other thing to think about the IRA is from a first principles perspective, why does it exist? And I think we're looking at the kind of the first steps of deglobalization, right? So what that probably means is and we were just talking about circularity and battery recycling, battery second life. Fundamentally, I don't think that there is going to be one global company that does all of that. I think, when lithium enters France, I don't think Macron is letting that lithium out of France anymore, right? And so I think what we're going to end up with are regional champions rather than global champions. And so that has made us think more around how we have investments in recycling companies in North America and China. Maybe we need to also be thinking about that in a European theater as well, and sort of throughout that full life cycle. And that's just in one segment of batteries, but I think that that is relevant across sort of the entire supply chain, across all of sort of the affected industries.
Thank you. More questions? No. Okay.
As early stage investors, how do you look at the regulatory issues and concerns, especially when it comes around energy and grid and things like that? How do you build it out into your investments, and how do you kind of take that risk or leap of faith? And especially because most of these technologies kind of work across borders. So how do you measure that as investors?
I guess just for clarification, you're talking about your tech being able to fit into existing regulatory systems, or having regulatory tailwinds because requirements will make your tech a mandatory thing. So from a requirements perspective, we don't particularly like to see that. Basically, the way that I would like to see it is that your tech or your product or your solution is financially viable in today's market. And then I would look at sort of a scenario modeling, sort of a what does it look like if the regulations are X, Y, Z, and how does that actually sort of map out? And then we end up with sort of a risked IRR of, combining those together, right? I think from an early stage, I would like to understand how you fit within your home market, and then how many markets external to your home market, map to that. So does the regulatory regime inside of, London match the regulatory regime inside of Tel Aviv map to Shanghai? I don't know, right? But wherever you're actually playing there, I would like to see some corollaries where it's easy for you to move to. And I'd like to understand the team profile to understand why you think you can do this in something that is orthogonal to that. So if New York is completely orthogonal to London, then I want to know, do you have somebody from, I don't know, who's up there, Con Ed, that can help you understand how that actually works?
Okay, thank you very much. Any question? Another one? Last one.
Hi there. Thank you very much for the panel. It was awesome. My question will be to John, actually. I mean, given we have like around 11.5 gigawatts of renewables just waiting to be linked to the grid, what's your take on solving these bottlenecks? What's your take? Is it like streamlining regulation, like landscape, like upgrading the grid itself? You got a question. Cheers.
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot in the press, hasn't there, recently about the amount of, if you're a wind farm, when you're going to get your connection. And I think the CEO of National Grid's been in the press today talking about how he would see that unblocked. I think that there's a need for more central planning, and we're seeing that developing onshore and offshore in terms of the grid infrastructure. And I think there needs to be quicker consenting. It takes so long to build a transmission line onshore at the moment. And obviously there are different challenges when you move offshore. There's consultations live at the moment about how local communities can benefit from having transmission infrastructure or just large energy infrastructure in their backyard. I think that's all positive. I think the other thing that would also help as well is, at the moment, large infrastructure projects are only built once there's a clear signal from the users. And I think what's known as anticipatory investment would be, whether that's at the transmission level, so that you can go and plug in almost to a grid that's already been built, or at the distribution level, so you can go and plug in your battery factory because there's already the infrastructure there at the distribution level, for instance. I think if we could crack that and understand how you share the risks of that anticipatory investment, in case that what you anticipate doesn't come along, I think that would go a long way to unblocking it. And at the moment, it just seems ridiculous that a wind farm's got to wait 10 years to connect. It just, in today's climate, it just doesn't seem right. So.
Okay. So it looks like there's a huge inefficiency in the total grid planning, and maybe some of the regulation is a bit too outdated. Okay, thank you very much. I think we can wrap up now. And the rest of the questions, if you have them, you can ask them at the networking drinks. Will you show where the networking drinks will be?
So the networking will be, you go down the stairs into the building across and follow the wall. You eventually see Winston, who'll be letting you in.
Thank you very much. So in my humble opinion, it was very interesting and enlightening. Probably I'm just one of the rare few who's been excited about this topic.